Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to my second video in a series I'm titling Dispy Primer on Christian Nationalism. Now, in this video, I want to address the difference between God's revealed will and God's decretive will and how that factors into the discussion on Christian nationalism. So, the real question here with Christian nationalism is, what is God's revealed will for nations and for civil magistrates in this age? And we need to differentiate that from God's decreed will or God's decretive will for nations and for civil magistrates in this age. We start by being reminded that what God has decreed, his decretive will, is sometimes the exact opposite of God's revealed will, right? He told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree. That was his revealed will for them. And nevertheless, they did. We know that God had decreed, according to his perfect wisdom and love and holiness, that from all eternity, this is exactly what was going to happen. They were going to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and contradict his prescriptive or his revealed will for them. And so often what happens is I hear dispensationalists today say, things along the lines of, we lose down here, or, we're going to experience persecution. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And that is true. That is in accordance with God's we might say decretive will. God has decreed, if you're a dispensationalist like me, you're premillennial, what we know is that God's decretive will is that things will in fact get worse. But that doesn't mean that's his revealed will. I would argue that God's revealed will, according to scripture, is actually the exact opposite. Paul tells young Timothy that of first importance in the local church that men are to pray with holy hands for kings and for all who are in authority. And then he gives a reason why. Yes, it's evangelistic. Those are evangelistic prayers. God does desire to see people of all kinds, all types, all categories, all offices and stations to be saved. Yes, that's true. But Paul ties an explanation there so that we may live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and dignity. That tells us that God's revealed will for us in this age is that we as Christians be able to live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and dignity. So let's talk then for just a moment about God's revealed will and God's decretive will for the three eschatological camps, right? The dispensational pre-mill camp says that God's decretive will is that things get worse, right? We lose down here. The post-mill camp says that God's decretive will is that things get increasingly better. It may not be over a period of 100 years or 50 years. It might be hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands of years. So I guess that's a possibility, but thousands of years. But eventually things get better. And then the mill camp generally tends to say that, things kind of stay neutral. There's less emphasis on whether or not they get better or worse. And so all of that is pertaining to God's decretive will. Now let's talk about God's revealed will. I think if we divide these two political camps, divide the camps into two. We have the pro-Christian nationalism position, and we have the anti-Christian nationalist position. The Christian nationalist position says that God's revealed will for nations and for civil magistrates is that we be self-consciously Christian, that we're self-consciously Christian, that we make expression of that we govern in a Christian way, and that we as a nation identify ourselves as a Christian nation. Now, the anti-Christian nationalism camp generally says that God's revealed will for nations is that they be self-consciously secular and pluralistic, right? A nation should incorporate religious liberty into its very fabric such that there is pluralism within that society, and the nation shouldn't be explicitly Christian. And really, I think many in that camp would also say that the magistrate, ought to govern according to natural law as opposed to special revelation according to scripture, we might say. And therefore, he's not to govern in an explicitly Christian way. So let's think for a moment then about the Christian nationalist camp. The Christian nationalist camp says that God's revealed will is for Christian nations. But within the Christian nationalist camp, there are those who believe that God's decretive will is that things will, in fact, get worse. They're not going to play out the way God has said that they should. That would be the premillennial position. And then we have those that say that God's decretive will is that things get better. And obviously, that would be the post-mill camp. And then we have the anti-Christian nationalist camp. Right. And they would say that God's revealed will is for secular pluralistic nations. And then they would say that God's decretive will is that things get worse. And that's really going to be the pre-mill camp and some of the mill camp. I don't really see the post-mill camp making that argument. I haven't seen too many in the post-mill camp be in the anti-Christian nationalist camp. So if we think about the issues here, I think we can just distill it down to the fact that there is God's decreed will and there is God's revealed will. And the Christian nationalist camp says that God's God's revealed will is that we be Christian nations governed by Christian magistrates in explicitly Christian ways. And despite that being God's revealed will, our camp would then break down into those who think that God's decretive will is that things will get worse. And then there's also some who thinks that things will get better. And then the anti-Christian nationalist camp says that God's revealed will is for pluralistic nations and that things generally are going to get worse, though we wish they would get better. So I think that's a good way to think about what's going on here. We're trying to discuss God's revealed will for nations and not confuse that with God's decretive will for nations.